Imagine opening a drawer in 1933 and finding a gold coin, not a weapon, not stolen property, not a forged document, a coin, something your grandfather might have saved, something a business might have held, something a bank might have handled every day, something that looked solid precisely because the rest of the economy did not. Now imagine the federal government telling you that, depending on what kind of gold it is, how much you have, and why you are holding it, keeping it could become a crime. That is the uncomfortable hook of Executive Order 6102. On April 5, 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued an order forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States. It required covered gold to be delivered by May 1, 1933. It carved out exemptions. It promised payment in other coin or currency, and it warned that willful violations could bring a fine of up to $10,000, imprisonment for up to 10 years, or both. That last part is where the story stops sounding like dusty monetary policy and starts sounding like a case file. Because gold was not just shiny metal, gold was savings, gold was confidence, gold was contract language, gold was the thing paper money was supposed to point back to. And in the spring of 1933, during one of the worst banking crises in American history, gold became something else. It became a problem the government wanted removed from private hands. This is not the internet version of the story, where every necklace is seized, agents kick down doors, and one executive order explains every modern fear about money. The real story is stranger than that. It is a story about a country trying to rescue its banking system, a president using emergency powers, citizens being told to surrender most monetary gold, contracts written in gold suddenly colliding with Congress, and the Supreme Court being asked what promises are worth when the government changes what money means. Tonight's case file: the day America outlawed gold. To understand why this happened, we have to avoid a modern mistake. Today, most people think of gold as an investment, a luxury, a collector's object, or something sold in ads by people who sound permanently worried about the future. In 1933, gold sat much closer to the machinery of money itself. The United States had lived with the gold standard in one form or another. Paper money and bank deposits existed, but gold still mattered as a promise behind the system. It was not simply that gold was valuable. It was that people believed the value of money was tied to gold. Contracts could be written with gold clauses. Bonds could promise payment in gold coin of a particular standard. The entire monetary imagination of the country had a metal weight behind it. That is why panic became dangerous. If people stop trusting banks, they withdraw currency. If they stop trusting currency, they want gold. And if enough people want gold at once, the system that promises gold begins to choke on its own promise. Federal Reserve history describes the pressure clearly. During the financial crisis of 1933, large quantities of gold flowed out from the Federal Reserve. Some went to individuals and firms inside the United States because they preferred holding metallic gold to bank deposits or paper currency. Some flowed abroad because foreign investors feared the dollar would be devalued. So the story begins with a simple emotional fact. People were afraid. And when people are afraid, they do not want abstractions. They want something they can touch. A bank balance is a number. A paper dollar is a promise. A gold coin feels like an answer. But if everyone reaches for the same answer at the same time, the answer becomes a crisis. Franklin Roosevelt took office in March 1933 with the banking system already under extreme strain. The Great Depression had broken confidence. People were pulling money out of banks and keeping it at home. Banks were failing. The fear became self-feeding. If you believed your bank might fail tomorrow, the rational thing was to withdraw today. But if everyone withdrew today, the bank was more likely to fail tomorrow. Roosevelt declared a banking holiday. The banking system, including the Federal Reserve, was shut down temporarily. Congress moved quickly on emergency legislation. Federal Reserve history notes that the Emergency Banking Act was introduced on March 9, 1933, and passed that evening in a chaotic scene where many members of Congress had not even had the chance to read the legislation before voting. That sentence should sit for a moment. The country was in such a state that Congress was passing emergency banking legislation at speed, under pressure, while the banks were closed. The act broadened presidential authority during a banking crisis. It included authority over banking functions and transactions involving foreign exchange, transfers of credit, and the export, hoarding, melting, or earmarking of gold or silver coin. This is the legal runway for what comes next. The government was not simply asking people to feel confident again. It was building tools to control the flows of money and gold. That is the key to the episode. The government saw hoarded gold not merely as private property, sitting quietly in drawers and boxes. It saw gold leaving the channels of banking and trade. It saw metallic confidence being pulled out of the system at the exact moment the system needed confidence to survive. So the question became brutal. If people do not trust the banks enough to leave money inside them, can the government force the symbol of trust back into the system? On April 5, 1933, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. The title was not subtle, forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates. The order declared that the national emergency continued and prohibited hoarding within the continental United States by individuals, partnerships, associations, and corporations. Then it defined the word that mattered. Hoarding meant the withdrawal and withholding of gold coin, gold bullion, or gold certificates from the recognized and customary channels of trade. That definition is important because it shows what the order was trying to attack. It was not written as a treasury hunting law. It was not about the romance of gold. It was about circulation. Gold outside the recognized channels was framed as a threat to the emergency monetary system. The core command was direct. All persons were required to deliver, on or before May 1, 1933, to a Federal Reserve Bank, branch, agency, or member bank, all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates they owned or came to own by April 28, 1933, except for listed categories. That is the part that gives the episode its title. America did not make the color gold illegal. It did not make every wedding ring a federal case, but it did order the surrender of most monetary gold, and it attached criminal penalties to willful violation. When the bank received the gold, the owner was to receive an equivalent amount in other coin or currency issued under United States law. So the legal shape was not simply, we take your gold and give you nothing. It was, the government forces the exchange, removes covered gold from private hoarding, and pays in legal currency. That distinction matters. It does not make the order gentle. It makes it legally precise. And precision is what keeps this story more frightening, not less, because it means the whole thing was not done in secret. It was done in paragraphs. The internet version of this story often collapses everything into one sentence. Gold was confiscated. The actual order is more interesting because it had lines. Lines are where law becomes dramatic. The order exempted gold needed for legitimate and customary use in industry, profession, or art. That included gold before refining and reasonable trade stocks for mining and refining. It allowed gold coin and gold certificates up to an aggregate of $100 belonging to any one person. It exempted gold coins with recognized special value to collectors of rare and unusual coins. It exempted gold coin and bullion held for recognized foreign governments, foreign central banks, or the Bank for International Settlements. It also allowed licensed transactions that were not hoarding, including certain import and export situations. Those exemptions matter because they destroy the lazy version of the story, but they also reveal something more subtle. The government was not banning gold as a material. It was trying to separate gold that served an approved function from gold that represented private monetary escape. Gold in dentistry, art, industry, or rare coin collecting could be treated differently from gold held as a monetary refuge. The same metal could be acceptable in one context and legally dangerous in another. That is very accidentally illegal. The object does not change. The legal meaning around it does. And then comes the penalty clause. Whoever willfully violated the order or its regulations could be fined up to $10,000, imprisoned up to 10 years, or both. In 1933, $10,000 was not a casual amount. It was a hammer, and 10 years in prison gave the order a kind of cinematic menace that the bureaucratic language almost hides. A coin in a drawer, a certificate in a box, a deadline on paper, and behind the deadline, prison. If this episode has one visual image, it is not a police raid. It is a counter. A person walks into a bank with gold and leaves with paper. That is quieter than a raid, but historically it may be more revealing. Modern power often does not need to look dramatic. It works through forms, deadlines, regulated institutions, and the fear of what happens if you refuse. Executive Order 6102 required the delivery of covered gold to the banking system. Member banks then had to deliver gold they owned or received to Federal Reserve banks and receive credit or payment. Transportation costs could be paid by the Treasury in proper cases. Extensions could be requested in cases of extraordinary hardship or difficulty. This was not improvised chaos. It was a system designed to pull gold out of private withholding and back into official control. The emotional question is obvious. If you had gold in April 1933, what would you have done? That question is dangerous because people answer it with hindsight. They imagine themselves brave, defiant, perfectly informed, and immune to pressure. But in real life, people had banks closed, prices falling, jobs disappearing, laws changing, and a federal order warning of massive fines and prison. They did not know how the courts would treat the program. They did not know what would happen next. The episode should not ask whether people were cowards. It should ask what ordinary decision-making feels like when money itself becomes unstable and the government changes the legal rules around the one object people think is stable. The story could end with coins, but the legal climax happens in contracts. For decades, many contracts and bonds included gold clauses. These clauses promised payment in gold coin or in money measured by gold value. The point was protection. If the value of paper money changed, the creditor wanted the promise tied to something more stable. In normal times, a gold clause could look like caution. In 1933, it looked like a threat to national monetary policy. If the government was trying to manage the dollar, devalue it, control gold, and restore the economy, then millions of contracts demanding gold or gold value could pull the old monetary standard back through the side door. Congress responded on June 5, 1933, with a joint resolution dealing with gold clauses in public and private obligations. In Norman v. Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the Supreme Court described the issue directly. The cases presented the question of the validity of that joint resolution with respect to gold clauses in private contracts for the payment of money. The legal question was elegant and brutal. Can a private contract force payment according to a gold promise after Congress has decided that those promises obstruct the monetary policy of the United States? This is where the episode becomes bigger than gold bugs and bank counters. It becomes a fight over what money is. Is money a promise between private parties? Is it a metal standard? Is it a creature of Congress? Can an emergency change the meaning of an old promise? Those questions reached the Supreme Court in 1935. The Gold Clause cases are not easy YouTube material at first glance. They involve bonds, coupons, monetary clauses, constitutional power, remedies, and the kind of legal language that can make a normal person feel as if the court is trying to put them to sleep. But the human issue underneath is simple. Someone was promised payment in gold or gold value. The government changed the rules. The person wanted the old promise honored. The government said honoring those promises would undermine national monetary policy. In Norman, dealing with private contracts, the court treated the question as one of congressional monetary power. The court was not there to decide whether the policy was wise. It was there to decide whether Congress had the power to remove the legal effect of gold clauses that interfered with the new monetary program. That distinction is everything. Courts often do not ask the emotionally satisfying question. They do not ask, was this fair, in the way a viewer might. They ask, who had power to do this? What remedy exists? What does the Constitution allow? Perry v. United States brought the problem into government obligations. The case is part of the same gold clause universe. Bonds, government promises, the gold value of money, and what happens when the sovereign changes the terms of the monetary game. For the episode, we do not need to turn the audience into constitutional lawyers. We need them to feel the trap. If the old gold promises survive, the government's new money policy is undermined by millions of private and public obligations. If the promises do not survive, then contracts people trusted can be rewritten by emergency monetary power. That is why the gold crisis is so narratively powerful. Every answer feels dangerous. This is the point where we have to talk about mythology. Executive Order 6102 has a long afterlife online because it touches almost every nerve at once. Money, government, property, crisis, banks, inflation, fear, trust. It is practically designed to become a meme law. But the meme version usually flattens the facts. It says all gold was illegal. That is not right. It implies jewelry was the point. That is not the order's focus. It imagines a nationwide treasure raid. That needs evidence, not vibes. It treats the order as if it happened in a vacuum, instead of inside a banking crisis, gold outflows, emergency legislation, monetary policy fights, and Supreme Court litigation. But correcting the exaggerations should not make the story boring. The real version remains astonishing. The government did order the surrender of most monetary gold. It did attach severe penalties to willful violation. It did attack gold clauses in contracts. It did move the country through a radical transformation of money. And it did all of this in the language of lawful emergency. That is the part worth sitting with. Not secret law, public law, not chaos, procedure, not a villain in a dark room, a crisis state writing down what it believed it needed to do. So what did America outlaw in 1933? Not gold as an element, not every gold object, not every heirloom, ring, or collector's coin. What the government targeted was the private hoarding of monetary gold during a national banking and currency emergency. That is narrower than the myth, and somehow more unsettling, because it shows how quickly the legal meaning of property can change when the state decides that private behavior is obstructing public policy. The gold coin does not physically change. The paper certificate does not physically change. The contract clause does not physically change, but the legal world around them shifts. Yesterday, the coin is security. Today, it may be hoarding. Yesterday, the gold clause is protection. Today, it may obstruct monetary policy. Yesterday, the dollar is tied to one kind of promise. Today, the government is trying to build another. That is why this episode belongs on Accidentally Illegal. It is not just about gold. It is about the strange moment when a society discovers that money is not only metal, paper, or numbers. Money is law. It is trust backed by institutions. It is a set of rules people agree to live inside until the rules suddenly change. And in 1933, the rules changed fast. A banking panic became emergency legislation. Emergency legislation became executive orders. Executive orders became surrender deadlines. Surrender deadlines became criminal penalties. Contract clauses became Supreme Court cases. And a metal people had treated as safety became, in the eyes of the government, part of the danger. Case closed.